Notre quatrième panéliste est inspecteur détective de l'unité prostitution à la police de Stockholm. Simon Haggstrom, diplômé de l'École nationale de police suédoise, parfait sa formation avec des cours universitaires portant sur le système juridique, l'exploitation sexuelle des mineurs, ainsi que la prostitution et la traite humaine. Depuis 2007, il combat activement la prostitution et la traite humaine au cœur de la capitale suédoise à titre d'inspecteur détective de l'unité prostitution de la police de Stockholm. En accord avec la loi suédoise sur la prostitution, qui criminalise l'achat, mais non la vente de services sexuels, son affectation principale consiste à éliminer la demande. Ainsi, la plus grande part de sa tâche est d'identifier et d'arrêter clients et proxénètes tout en soutenant les victimes de la prostitution et de la traite. Depuis 2009, il est membre désigné du groupe de travail national suédois contre la prostitution et la traite humaine, organisme formé d'experts de la police nationale, de la police criminelle, de la Chambre internationale du bureau des procureurs, des services sociaux et de l'autorité de migration suédoise. Au cours de sa carrière, il a personnellement arrêté plus de 800 hommes pour achat de services sexuels. Il est régulièrement invité à parler du modèle suédois de lutte contre l'exploitation sexuelle sur diverses tribunes, telles que le Jimmy Carter Center à Atlanta, le Sénat français à Paris et le département de la justice d'Irlande. Il a également pris la parole au cours de nombreuses conférences, notamment en Argentine, en Belgique, en Bulgarie, en Croatie, à Cuba, en Angleterre, en France, en Allemagne, en Irlande, en Lituanie, en Norvège, en Roumanie, en Espagne, au Turkménistan et aux États-Unis et maintenant au Canada. Mesdames et messieurs, nous accueillons Simon Haggstrom.
Thanks. Okay, hello Canada. Hello, great to be here. Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm about to summarize our 16 years of criminalizing the buying of sex in 20 minutes. That's quite difficult, so we better go straight on. Just a few words about Sweden. How many of you have been in Sweden? Raise your hand. Oh, there's a couple. Great. So Sweden is kind of a small country. We only have about 9.5 million inhabitants. The capital is Stockholm, consisting of about 2.2 million residents. We actually, within the police, we have 2 units fighting prostitution and human trafficking. And this is really important for me to say, because sometimes I hear rumors, especially in other countries, that in Sweden, they don't care about pimps and traffickers anymore. They only go after the buyers. Okay, that's not true. In Stockholm, for example, where I work, we have the trafficking unit, and their primary assignments is simply to arrest pimps and traffickers. And we also have the prostitution unit where I work, and our primary assignment is to go after the buyers. So what you can say is that we work with the same type of crime, but we attack the problem from 2 different angles. And this has proven to be a very successful method of working because we exchange a lot of information with each other. So, but I'm here to talk about our Sex Purchase Act. This is actually the law text from the Swedish Criminal Code. And this is actually very easy legislation to understand. It is not an advanced legislation. It is simply criminalized to buy sex, but not to sell. There are some comments that I want to mention on this legislation. We introduced it the 1st of January 1999. And this is quite interesting because I can see a lot of similarities here in Canada if I compare to how it was when we introduced this in Sweden, because this was highly controversial in Sweden back in the days. This was the result of a social democratic government. Several of the political parties actually opposed the legislation, claiming that this will not be effective. It saddens me to say, but even the Swedish police opposed and say that we also have to criminalize the one who is actually selling sex too, if this is going to be effective. And in fact, a majority of the Swedish population were also against the criminalization. In fact, almost 70% of the Swedish population did not want this legislation. But today, All of our governmental parties, including the opposition, are in favor of this legislation. And this is the only thing, probably, that they are all agreeing upon. The Swedish police, along with the social services, also agree on this legislation, supports it. And in fact, we've changed the mindset of the Swedish population. Nowadays, about 70% of the population is in fact in favor of the legislation. So this law really has had a normative effect on the whole of Sweden, in fact. And I think this simply can be explained because of people sees that it's working, especially when you compare to other countries in Europe who chose to legalize this, and you can see the huge difference. This was not a legislation that was introduced overnight or thought of overnight. This was the result of a 30-year-long debate which started back in the 1970s. And this is also very important for you to understand because, as I said, this legislation was highly controversial. Also, I want to mention that, of course, pimping and trafficking is criminalized. We have a zero tolerance on pimping. The only thing that is not criminalized is the selling of sex. So, also the attempt of buying sex is illegal, which means that if I, as a detective, hear a man offering money to a woman in the street, for example, in exchange for sex, I will arrest him for the attempt of buying sex. Also, to help someone else to buy sex is actually illegal. We've had cases where one man has been paying a woman in prostitution in order for her to have sex with his friend. They both will be arrested for the buying of sex. The payment can be other than money. It could be drugs, alcohol. However, almost all of our cases involves money. The law is gender neutral, which means that we don't really care whether the person selling sex is a man or a woman, or we don't care whether the person buying sex is a man or a woman. However, we've had this legislation for 16 years now, more than that, and there isn't a single case reported where a woman has been arrested for the buying of sex. Which means, and maybe this will offend some of you, but as far as I see this, and I've been working in the front with this for a couple of years now, I see this as a male problem, because that's what it is. It is up to us men to actually take our responsibility here. And it always saddens me that on occasions and events like this, there is always a huge majority of women. And where are the men? That troubles me, because this is a male problem, really. The punishment for thank you. Thanks. The punishment for a first-time offender is 50 days of fines, which is proportional to your income. So the more money you have, the more fine you will have. But there is a maximum of 1 year imprisonment. So why did Sweden choose, as the first country in the world, why did we choose to criminalize the sex buyers? I think this is really important for you to understand. The problem that we did in Sweden, if you want to learn a lesson by us, is that one of the reasons that the police opposed this legislation was that the police never received any training about why it was introduced. Because if you don't know the basic principles behind the legislation, then this legislation doesn't make any sense, especially not for a police officer. It doesn't make sense to criminalize one part of a crime but not the other. As for a police officer, the first time I heard about this, I would relate to drugs, thinking, okay, it is the same as you should criminalize the buying of drugs, but not the selling. That sounds crazy. And that's because I didn't understand the basic principles behind it. And I think that's also something for you a lesson to be learned for you here in Canada, that the police, the authorities, they need to get training about what is prostitution, what does it do to the persons exploited, and so on, because then you will easily understand a legislation like this. The first principle is equality, and this is probably the strongest one, the strongest reason why we introduced this legislation. It is not acceptable that women and children can be bought and sold in a modern equal society, and that is why we include the buying of sex in the crime category of men's violence against women. And we don't really make a difference whether whether the buyer, John, is buying sex from a trafficking victim or someone who is claiming that he or she is doing this by her free will. Why? Because we believe that prostitution is not only harmful to the individuals involved, but to society at large. It hurts everyone, even the ones who are not involved, because a society which legalizes the buying of sex, that does something to society. It does something to young men, boys who are being raised up to see women as objects. That's why we don't want prostitution. But however, we don't want to criminalize the ones who are being exploited. And this is a quote from this proposition that preceded the legislation. And it says that it's unreasonable to also criminalize the one who, at least in most cases, is the weaker part. I want to say something here, and this might also be a little bit controversial, but I've been doing this for such a long time now that I want to be very clear about this. You have to have the right focus here. Many times in public debates and discussions, you will hear people claiming that they are selling sex out of their free will, and that this legislation victimizes them, stigmatizes them, and that it's not good for them. Let me say like this, I respect them, and in fact I agree with them, because this legislation was not meant for them. The problem here is that these voices who are claiming that they are selling sex because they want to are only representing a small and tiny minority. The problem is that the huge majority, the young woman from Romania or the single mother from Nigeria, you will not hear her voice in the radio shows or in the TV sofa or read about her in the newspaper. So you have to have the right focus here and understand that this big majority of women being exploited in prostitution are victims of human trafficking, and you don't hear their voices in the media. So this legislation is about not listening to the ones who are screaming the loudest, but the ones who are actually suffering the most. And that is very important to understand. And I know this might be, some of you might be offended by this, but in Sweden, we need to have a legislation which protects the ones who are actually suffering. The third and last basic principle is demand. To start with, it is about recognizing the connection to organized crime. This is something that we speak way too little about, as far as I see it. Many times we tend to make the issue of prostitution almost like a moral thing, whether it's right or wrong. And we totally miss that a majority of these women that end up in prostitution are victims of organized crime. And why are organized crime doing this? Well, because of money, of course. Okay? And this is kind of the whole idea of the Nordic model. If we strike hard on the men buying sex, if we decrease the men buying sex, then we automatically cut the source of income for organized crime, because they wouldn't be interested in doing this if it wasn't for the fact that we have men who are willing to pay for sex. So this is about to focus on the root cause, to understand that the sex buyers are the ones who are actually paying the monthly salary for the traffickers. So this is one of the oldest myths in the book. I hear it everywhere. In Sweden, they cut street prostitution by 50%, but it just went underground. And now it's hidden in apartments and in hotel rooms. But Swedish police doesn't care, because they are only interested in what is seen to the public eye, right? I hear this quite much. Let me say, I will be showing 2 slides right now, picturing an internet advertisement. I hope no one will get offended by it. It is not my intention, but I really want to show you how this statement is actually just a myth or even a lie. To start with, prostitution cannot go underground. Prostitution cannot hide. And the reason for that is simply because buyers and sellers have to let each other know of their existence, right? They have to advertise. And I'm most sure that you will have sites like this here in Canada, or am I wrong? No, they are in all countries all over the world. So let me say something, by the way. human trafficking will always pose as voluntary prostitution. Okay, you will never read an internet advertisement saying that, "Hi, my name is Donna, I'm a victim of human trafficking. If you want to buy sex from me, please call this number." Okay, because some countries or in some debates, people want to make a distinction between, oh, we should criminalize the buyers who actually pays for sex with a trafficking victim, but the ones who are paying by someone who is doing this by free will, that should be legal. If we as police have to do surveillance, have to do weeks of investigation to actually see whether someone is forced or not, how are we supposed to actually, a sex buyer in a couple of 1 or 2 minutes are going to know whether a woman is a victim of human trafficking or not? That's craziness. So if a sex buyer can browse into these sites, finding these advertisements and call a phone number, of course can the police do the same. It's not more difficult than this. In this advertisement there is a phone number. The sex buyer, the John, is calling this phone number, and he just book a time. And I do that also every day as a detective. Okay, that's how we work. We just call this advertisement and I say, "Hi, my name is Simon, I want to buy some sex. Where should I go?" And I will get a text message with the address. It's not more difficult than that. Then we just go there and do surveillance, and we arrest the Johns when they are coming. So it takes me, just give me a phone and it takes me 5-10 minutes to find the so-called hidden prostitution. When we arrest Johns, we mostly arrest them when they are leaving the apartment. We confiscate their cell phones because we will find important evidence. You can see a text message conversation here. I don't think you see what it says, but there is actually a man that we arrested, and he asks the woman if she could give him oral sex without a condom. When we arrested him, when we identified ourselves as police officers, he said, "I'm one of you." And it turned out that he was actually a chief prosecutor. We make the interview with the man on the spot out in the field. If he admits to the crime, he will receive this fine, which I mentioned before. Most of the men that we arrest actually admits to the crime. And the reason for that is then they will avoid a trial, okay? Because then the prosecutor has the possibility to send out the fine without taking the case to court. And in Sweden, all trials, all court sessions are public, okay? So these men don't want to end up in court because everyone, especially law students, they love to go to a court session where a man is actually charged for the buying of sex. Okay, so most of these men actually admits to the crime. So we arrest about 150 to 200 men each year. After we've done with the man, we will go to the apartment, speaking with the woman, just getting her statement, asking questions about how much did the man pay, for what did he pay, and so on. Of course, the women are not, they don't have to give their statement, but most of them actually do. I would say about 9 out of 10 actually do, because they trust us. They know about the Swedish legislation. They know that they will not be punished in any way. We will not take their money. We will just inform them, give them our contact details if they want our help, and then we will step out of the apartment and we will send, and our social worker will enter the room. And this is something that I would really recommend you to do in Canada if you're not already doing this. Since 2 years ago, we have a social worker working in the unit, in the prostitution unit. Before that, I was used to that if I needed the social services, I need to call them in the field. And almost always they would say that they don't have time to come out. Okay, but now we have a social worker with us from the beginning. She has seen everything. She has the exact same information that I have. And this is just a great way of working because she only has one primary assignment, and that is actually to help women and men exit prostitution. So this is really great thing to do. I will actually skip the next slide because time is running out. I just want to mention we have also social workers dealing only with the men buying sex with counseling. So all the men that we arrest actually get an offer to be contacted by the so-called BOSS project. So a little bit about, I actually skipped all the statistics today. Instead, I just want to give you a little bit of the operational results that I am seeing in the front lines. I believe that another frequent myth about this legislation is that if you criminalize the buying of sex, violence will increase against women in prostitution. Okay, we had our top law expert, Miss Anna Skarhed, who is the Chancellor of Justice in Sweden, to evaluate this legislation, and she came to the conclusion that there is no evidence that supports this. I would take this one step further, claiming that this law actually protects the women. Why? Because it puts pressure on the John. You see, most of the men that we arrest, they are risking a lot, because in Sweden this is a very shameful crime to be arrested for. So they are risking their family, they are risking their job, they are risking their social network. It is not in their interest to cause a scene, because they know that if they do something bad, the woman can pick up her phone, call 911, then the police will come there, and she doesn't risk to be punished in any way. So this law puts all the pressure on the John and works in a very protective way, as I see it. We've also seen that the law is a good tool in detecting human trafficking. When we go after the buyers, we automatically find the traffickers and the pimps, and we give those cases to the trafficking unit. We can see that the law creates a bad market for the traffickers, simply because we cut their source of income. They will move on to another city or another country because this law messes things up for them. We can see that there are higher prices because of the criminalization. If I speak with women who have been working in Germany, for example, they might tell me that they need to meet with about 3 men for the same price as 1 in Sweden, so which means that they have to meet with a lesser amount of men. And there is a good and steady flow of information to us, because since we have pretty good reputation, we will get a lot of information from these women. How many minutes do I have? 2 more, excellent. So, how many recognize the rocket? This is Tintin's rocket. You know about Tintin, right? Yeah, I love Tintin. The reason why I choose this rocket is because I believe that the Nordic model stands on 3 legs, okay? And you have to have all those 3 legs. This rocket will never take off if you don't have all of these 3 things. You need to criminalize the sex buyer, which means you have to have the correct legislation, but that has to go hand in hand with strong social efforts. And many times we miss to talk about that, because these women has to be provided exit strategies and social services and NGOs. They have to have the proper resources to actually help women to exit. But you can have those 2 things. You can have the legislation, you can have strong social efforts, but this rocket will never take off if you don't have people, officers, social workers out on the streets actually enforcing the legislation. If you don't have that, this Nordic model will never be successful as it was meant to be. So I hope this will probably be a challenge for you here in Canada, because it was in Sweden. The most difficult thing was to get the police to actually start using the legislation. So I really hope and want to encourage you to actually start using the legislation, because then you will see the real result. Thank you very much for listening to me. Thanks.